Joy, thank you for coming through. I guess when you talk about Africa, there are various narratives that you hear. You hear people saying, oh, we've got this youth dividend that we should be preparing for, and then some people say potentially looking at a youth problem in the future. But today we want to celebrate Africa by talking about our potential and consumers in particular. How big are we as a consumer market?
So it's a huge consumer market, and I think when people look at Africa, they tend to generalize. I mean, it's 54 countries on the continent, and very often people just look at it as a minuscule population.
Right.
And in fact, the reason why it was so interesting for us to chat about this today is because on the market intelligence side and the market research side, there's largely been a perception that research can be done out there in global locations for Africa. But for us, we're saying, ask the Africans.
Right.
We have the insights, we have the consumers, and the role is to actually amplify the consumers' voices within Africa and to tell the story and their narrative of how brands are treating them, how they perceive brands, and what their expectations are of brands.
Yeah. So characterize that consumer for me.
So it's interesting. I think a lot of talk now is around the millennials and the differences that they come with, because it's a large market. And the fact is, they're quite different in the way they perceive brands. They're a lot more demanding. So consumers have become unforgiving.
Sure.
So very often, I think corporates and brands look at their service offering and they look at what we call the hygiene factors, which is ticking the boxes, making sure you have the right product at the right price.
Right.
But consumers don't actually, and particularly the millennials, they don't actually give you credit for that anymore. Their expectation is much broader. So they're looking at, socially, what are you doing?
Right.
What is the impact of your brand? Are you understanding what I want? And are you giving me what I'm asking for?
Absolutely. And I see you are excluding me and people who look like me because you're talking about these millennials. Are they the most important component of that consumer market in Africa?
No, I think it would be a sweeping statement to say they're the most important. But I think what's important is that
they're
brands need to realize that they are the future. But then every single customer must be understood.
Sure.
So gone are the days where you used to be able to put together a marketing campaign on the basis, and there's a tendency to reflect on yourself and think your views are the same as everyone else's views. And that's what traditionally marketers used to do. And gone are the days where you can do that. It's very vital that you actually understand better. So there are all sorts of techniques nowadays which we engage in. So things like video mystery shopping.
Right.
Do you know that it's possible for us to come through and actually simulate and show you what your client is going through?
Wow.
To walk into, for example, a financial services institution and come in and say, I'm here to open a bank account.
Sure.
And all that is seen, and we're able to provide footage that shows you so that you as a brand can understand what your consumer is going through. Because we put in place the policies and the procedures and what we think will work for the consumer. But it's important to get right into the consumer's mind and see what's going on there.
Absolutely. And to get into the consumer's mind, you need to have information about them. And that's been one of the key holes when you talk about the African consumer market. Because I remember when CNBC Africa started years ago, and I think many of South Africa's banks, as well as some of the big companies, when they try to get into the continent, data, dololo.
Exactly, exactly. And that's where, so we believe that companies can't afford to take that gamble anymore.
Right.
You can't assume that, and people often make a mistake and they say, so we've done some research, and what they really mean is they've spent some time on Google. We can't actually call that, you know, it's not foolproof. There's a lot more that needs to be done, and that's where market research is important, because that's actually now beyond seeing the paper-based research. It's now engaging with consumers, engaging with he or she that may be using your brand. So we're able to come up with statistics, for example, where we can tell you that over 60% of consumers are saying they will be loyal to a brand that operates and acts ethically.
Right.
So are you, when you're producing your brands, thinking about ethics?
Sure.
Because it's important to the consumer.
Absolutely. Now, when you talk about the behavior of those consumers, it's similar to what you would find in the established markets. Of course, we have to benchmark against the West because that's what is available.
So it is actually quite similar. So in the West, a global piece of research that was done was showing that close to 94% of consumers there expect that their brand has to be socially responsible. So, you know, I think CSI, or corporate social investment, is something that people may not take as seriously. But it's actually quite an important consideration for consumers. So if you're servicing me within my community, what are you doing for my community besides giving me the product which I've asked for?
Absolutely. Joy, we have to cut it here. Time is run out.
Already?
It's a huge Africa Day program. But
Yes.
thanks for coming
Thank
through.
you for having me.